Hey everyone, over the last weekend, Canvas released an update, and I think it's really interesting. If I'm editing an assignment right here or a page, and I go to the HTML editor, now I see something called a pretty editor, an HTML pretty editor. Now I can switch and toggle between pretty text and raw HTML text. And so my question is, what is the difference between these, and what's so special about the pretty HTML editor? And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. We're going to discuss the Canvas HTML Pretty Editor and why it's important, and it might not be a game changer, but it's really going to impact the way that some people work, and I think it's going to improve a lot of our workflows. So first and foremost, what is HTML? When you think of the code that goes behind the page, that's the HTML. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and whenever you format a picture or if you change a text, if you change a color or add a border to something, you're essentially changing this hypertext markup language, the HTML content. And then you can see that in the HTML editor. A lot of people think of HTML as a type of language. It says it literally right there, that it's a markup language. But in reality, it's not exactly a language. In a recent study by MIT, neuroscientists found that interpreting the code and writing HTML activates different parts of the brain than our language processing centers. So in some ways, learning and writing HTML is similar to learning a new language, in that you have to learn new symbols and terms, and you have to organize them in a specific way so that you can communicate. But in reality, it's not registered in the same parts of the brain as language is. It's registered in the same parts of the brain as things like problem solving and math equations. And so in reality, it's more like solving a problem, putting together a puzzle, than it is learning or speaking a new language. And that's what makes this new Pretty HTML editor so amazing. When I look at the code here, I can see it organized, and I can see color codes, and I can see indentations, and various different settings, and this really is going to help us out. If you look at the raw HTML editor, all you see is the raw HTML code. And this is what we've been seeing. Some of us have been seeing this for the last 10 years, and that's fine, but if you make a mistake, it's not so obvious. And so if you want to isolate something, for example, here I want to isolate an image. Here's the image, and let me isolate that. I can identify, here's an H2, so that's a heading, number 2 heading, so that font is going to be bigger, it's going to be bolder. Here's a paragraph, here's another paragraph, I can isolate that. I can see that this is an ordered list, and so instead of a bullet list where it's bullet points, this would be 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's that first list item, here's the second, third, fourth list items, and another picture. And so I can kind of see this, I can kind of make sense. You can hit some hard returns, and it's not going to affect the page at all. In fact, if I were to hit 1,000 returns, it doesn't affect the code anything, because this blank space is not code. That's not HTML. And so if I save that, it's just going to push this image right back to where it was before. Now, if I were to start inserting characters, then that would kind of screw things up a little bit. But hitting hard returns does not. And so for many years, this is how some of us have been organizing the page. As we're working in there, we'd hit some hard returns. And the problem is that if you're making an adjustment and you forget to close out a quotation mark, for example, that's going to affect, it could potentially affect the rest of the page. And if not, it's going to definitely affect this part that I'm working on. So let's make sure that quotation mark is in there. Then hop over to the Pretty Text Editor, and we can see indentations, we can see color coding. If I were to leave off, for example, these markings right here, that affects the entire rest of the page, because it recognizes, hey, you started a div and you haven't actually finished typing out that div. And so then I can put in those markings. And I'm an old school person that I put 2 spaces behind a period back from the typewriter days, and that's not really necessary. And so Canvas is saying, hey, by the way, you got something here that you might want to check out. This, I don't really need those 2 spaces, for example. So this orange is telling me, hey, why don't you look over here, see if, is this really what you want? But then for the more important things, for the egregious things, if I were to leave something important off, then, well, that's important, and it lets me know. It says, hey, you're working on this thing and you're not quite done yet. Why don't you finish up over there so that you don't screw up your entire page? And that's why sometimes you might have been working on a page and you bold something and you forget, maybe in the code for some reason there's no end to the bold, and then the rest of the page is screwed up and it's like, why is my whole page looking weird? It's usually a misplaced comma, or there isn't a quotation mark to close things out, or you didn't close out a div. Most of the time it's just a rookie mistake. For example, here if I have this list item, and if I don't include these list things, then it might say, okay, well, you're not quite done with that list, so let's put that in there. So let's explore how the HTML pretty editor can really help us out. I'm going to close this out. And what I would like to do for this example, I have an HTML color eyedropper that I use and it tells me all of the different color codes that are on the page. And so I'm going to find one of these, maybe one of these dark shades of purple. And I would like to change this text right here so that it matches the purple from my image. So, that could be interesting. So I'm going to go in to do this effect. We'll go into the edit, and I'm going to find, let's see, it's right here after the list, and it starts with the paragraph. You will have a range of materials to review. Already I can tell you this page, it's a lot easier to find things than it was before. And I'll tell you, before I get into that, in the past, how I would, if I wanted to isolate a certain part of the page and go into the HTML window, I might put in something obvious like a whole bunch of a single letter. And just so that I'm scrolling down and I can see, okay, there it is. For sure, this is the area that I want to look at. And even once I find that, it's still, this isn't nice to look at. These paragraphs here, it's just a whole lot of code. So hopping over to the pretty HTML editor, I can go down and I can find that the paragraphs are nicely organized and indented. And here's where I want to make that change. And so I'm going to type out a div, and I'm going to put a style. And what I would like is to get a color, and I'm just pasting the color that we copied a moment ago. And before I put in the final quotation mark, it's saying that right now the pretty HTML editor is saying you have a style, and everything after this quotation mark is part of the style. So technically right now all of this is part of the style until I close that out. And then it says, okay, good, we're good to go. And so I'm going to close that div, and then I want these 3 paragraphs to have that style, to have that color. And so then I'm just going to end the div. And you notice as soon as I ended the div, it moved it right over so that the indent matched that div. And so then I can see pretty clearly that this is the div, there's the div I started, and based on the indent, there's where the div ends. And I can see another div right here that's not indented. And so if I search up here, then I can see, oh yeah, that div isn't indented. And so all of this div is part of that. It's all grouped together, or all of that div is all grouped together until right here, then I start something new. So let's try one more thing before I move on and save this. I want to add a horizontal rule. So I'm going to put HR, and let me just add a tiny bit of styling. And so here I put the quotation mark, and immediately everything says, hey, okay, you started something, now you got to finish it. And in this case, I'm just going to put a margin. I'll put a margin on the top, maybe of 10 pixels. And then I close it off, and then everything says, okay, it breathes a sigh of relief and says, okay, we're done. We know what to do now. I still have to close that off, but at least it's not going to mess up the styling. And so an HR is just a horizontal rule. It's a little line. So I just want to put a line separating the course outcomes from the rest of this content. Let's go ahead and save this and see where we're at. This might be hard to see. It might not have been the best example, but this text right here is all a different color, and it's the color of the shadow here on the image that I had, as opposed to this color here is black. So I have black. Here's where I made that change. And there's my little horizontal rule. And if I wanted to put some space, maybe I wanted to put a margin over there. Let's edit that horizontal rule just a little bit more. So I'm going to go back into the HTML editor. We're going to find that horizontal rule. So I have a margin on the top. Let's go ahead and put a margin on maybe the left. So margin left, and just so that we have something to see, let's put it at 50 pixels. And now you can see it coming in 50 pixels. Maybe 25 would have been better. Yeah, so dive into this HTML editor, get to know the pretty HTML editor, because I think it's really going to be your friend. And if you're just starting to get into HTML, or if your colleagues are just starting, then this is a great way to start, to be honest. I think that this is going to help make sense of things that are not necessarily intuitive, because HTML is its own thing. It's symbols, and we try and make sense of it, but a lot of times it just doesn't make all that much sense until it does. So have fun exploring. Go write some code. Go try and break some stuff in the HTML editor. Try and fix it. Try and figure things out. And while you're doing that, then feel free to subscribe to this channel, hit that like button, and get those notifications, and also follow us on social media. With each of these videos, you can go to our companion website, howtocanvas.com, and follow along on the blog post to see pictures and to see everything written up. Until next time, I want to wish you happy teaching and learning.